I've always loved Halloween. When I was 10, it wasn't just another holiday, it was the day I looked forward to all year. Weeks before it even arrived, I'd already be sketching costume ideas, begging my parents for fake blood, and counting down the days until the decorations went up. My dad loved it just as much as I did. He'd go all out. Fake cobwebs, giant spiders, skeletons hanging from trees, even one of those fog machines that made the whole yard look haunted. That year felt special. My two best friends, James and Curlis, came over to help us decorate. James was 14, the cool older kid who could climb trees without breaking a sweat, and Curlis was 12, loud, funny, always teasing me for being the youngest. We spent the whole afternoon turning my front yard into something straight out of a horror movie. My dad was on the porch setting up a creepy scarecrow. I was draping cobwebs over the bushes with curls, and James was up on a small ladder hanging a plastic ghost from the big oak tree by the sidewalk. Everything felt perfect. The sun was setting, the fog machine hissed, and we were laughing about who'd get the most candy that night. That's when I saw him. A man I'd never seen before was walking down the street. He slowed down when he reached our house, then stopped, just stood there, watching us. He wasn't walking a dog, he wasn't on his phone, he wasn't even looking at the other houses, just ours. He looked completely ordinary, maybe late 30s, wearing a plain gray jacket and jeans, average in every way, except for his smile. It was wide, too wide, like it didn't fit his face. He looked right at me and said, "Wow, you guys are doing a great job. Getting ready for the big night?" I smiled back because I was a friendly kid. "Yeah, we're trying to be the spookiest house on the block." He nodded slowly, eyes scanning every corner of our yard. "I bet you'll get a lot of candy," he said. "You planning to go trick-or-treating around here? What's your route?" Something about that question made my stomach twist. It didn't sound curious, it sounded personal. But before I could answer, my dad came down from the porch. He put a hand on my shoulder and stepped between us. "Can I help you?" my dad asked, his voice calm but with an edge to it. The man's smile flickered. "Just admiring your decorations," he said. Then, glancing at me, "Your boy's a hard worker." My dad didn't move. "Time to go inside." "Son?" I obeyed. As I turned toward the door, I felt his hand tighten just a little. I looked back one last time, and that's when I saw it. The man's smile was gone. His expression had hardened, eyes cold and sharp, locked on my dad. He stared for a few seconds, then turned and walked away down the street. No wave, no goodbye, just gone. 2 nights later, I woke up to a loud crash outside my window. The kind of sound that makes your stomach drop before your mind even wakes up. Something heavy had fallen in the front yard. My room was upstairs, facing the street, and through the blinds I could see the pale orange glow of the streetlight stretching long shadows across the lawn. That's when I saw him. The same man from before. He was standing halfway behind the oak tree, motionless, just watching our house, my breath caught in my throat. The scarecrow my dad had set up was lying flat on the grass, and I knew that sound had been him knocking it over. He wasn't moving, just staring straight up at the windows, like he was trying to figure out which one was mine. When his head tilted slightly upward, I felt a cold wave rush through my chest. I ducked down fast, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. For a few seconds, I just sat there frozen, too scared to breathe. Then I ran. I bolted down the stairs and found my dad still awake, watching TV. I could barely speak, but the words finally came out. "Dad, that man is in our yard." He was on his feet in seconds, grabbing the flashlight from the table and heading for the door. I stood by the hallway as he stepped outside, scanning the yard, the street, the shadows. A full minute passed before he came back in and locked the door behind him. "There's no one out there," he said quietly, but I could see the tension in his face. The scarecrow just fell. Maybe it was the wind. I wanted to believe him, but I knew what I saw. The wind doesn't stare back at you. The next morning was October 31st, Halloween. Even though I was still uneasy, excitement started to win over fear. All day at school, I kept thinking about costumes, candy, and the smell of pumpkin candles. After class, James and Curlis came by and we changed. I was a ninja in all black, James was a werewolf, and Curlis a vampire with fake blood and a red cape. When the sky turned orange, we grabbed our candy bags and ran out the door. At first, everything was perfect. Kids were laughing, parents waved from porches, and each house gave us more candy than the last. But as the night went on, we started chasing the good candy. We went farther, block after block, until the streets looked different, darker. The houses here had no lights, no decorations, just silence and wind. Then we saw a small house with one lonely pumpkin glowing on the porch. As we walked closer, a voice called out from the shadows across the street. "Hey kids, over here! I've got the good stuff." We turned and my blood went cold. It was him, the same man. He stood in a dark driveway holding a big bowl, that fake smile stretched too wide on his face. "Come on, don't be shy," he said, trying to sound friendly. Curly and I took one step toward him, but James grabbed our arms. "No," he said sharply. "Don't. We need to go." His voice shook. The man's smile dropped. He tossed the bowl and it hit the ground with a hollow sound. It was empty. Then he started walking toward us, fast. "Run!" James yelled, and we did. Our bags bounced, candy spilled, and my heart felt like it would burst. I could hear his shoes slamming against the pavement behind me, closer with every step. Curlis darted between two houses and vanished into the dark. James was ahead, shouting for me to hurry. I looked back and the man's face twisted with anger. His eyes locked on me. I could hear him breathing, rough and furious. My costume felt heavy, slowing me down. Then I felt it. His hand grabbing my back. I screamed, "Get away from my son!" My dad's voice tore through the night. He came running from the side street, flashlight in one hand, rage burning in his eyes. The man froze, then let go of me so fast I fell to the ground. He stared at my dad, silent, then turned and sprinted away into the dark. My dad pulled me up and hugged me tight. His hands were shaking. A few moments later, James came back, gasping for air, and Curlis peeked out from behind a fence. None of us said a word. We just stood there under the cold streetlight, breathing hard, realizing that Halloween night had almost become something much darker. My dad told me later that he started to panic when we didn't come home on time. He had called James's house, but no one answered. That's when he grabbed his car keys and drove out into the night to look for us. He said he stopped by one of our neighbors' houses, asking if they'd seen 3 kids dressed like a ninja, a vampire, and a werewolf. Luckily, they had, and they told him which direction we went. That was how he found us. If they hadn't seen us that night, I don't even want to imagine what could have happened. We never saw that man again, but his face still haunts me every Halloween. What was supposed to be a night full of candy and laughter turned into something that changed the way I see this holiday forever. Now every time I see a stranger standing too long in the dark, I can't help but wonder, what if he's still out there, watching someone else's kid? Halloween is supposed to be fun, but sometimes real monsters don't wear masks. Have you ever had something truly scary happen on Halloween night? My name's Mark, I'm 17, and I live in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago. The kind of place where everyone waves when they drive by and nothing bad ever seems to happen. That Halloween night, our neighbor Mr. Taylor was throwing a small get-together. He's an older guy, retired, always friendly, and known for giving out the best candy on the block. My parents said it was fine if I went, since I didn't really have any big plans anyway. That's where I met Jake. He said he was 19, some kind of distant relative of Mr. Taylor's. From the moment we started talking, he seemed chill, tall, short brown hair, plain hoodie, jeans. We started chatting about video games, and when he mentioned he was into Call of Duty, I laughed. Same here. Before long, we were playing a quick round on Mr. Taylor's old console, talking trash and cracking up at how bad the graphics were. Jake told me he lived a few towns over, but visited Mr. Taylor sometimes. He seemed normal, fun even. We traded numbers before I left, and I remember thinking he could actually be a solid friend. A little later, my mom asked me to grab a pumpkin for the porch since my dad was still stuck at the office working late again. When I mentioned it to Jake, he smiled. "I know a great spot," he said. "There's this farm out on Country Road 47, huge pumpkins, super cheap." I didn't see any reason to say no. It was still early evening, around 6, and the sun was barely setting, so I grabbed the keys to my mom's old Ford and we headed out. As we drove past the last rows of houses, the streetlights faded behind us, and the open road ahead turned darker, quieter, in that way that only Halloween night can. No streetlights out there, just open fields swallowed by fog and trees stretching like dark fingers into the night. The air grew colder as we drove, and a heavy mist began to roll across the road, thick and pale like something alive. My headlights barely cut through it. It felt like we were driving straight into nowhere. Jake kept talking about random things, school, games, his so-called gap year before college. His voice was calm, easy, but something in me stayed tense. Finally, after 20 long minutes, we pulled into what looked like an old farm. A broken wooden sign leaned by the entrance, letters faded but still readable. Miller's Pumpkin Patch. Only there were no lights, no cars, no people, just endless rows of pumpkins, half hidden under the fog. "Where is everyone?" I asked, my voice lower than I meant. Jake shrugged. "Probably closing up. Hang tight, I'll check around back." He opened his door and disappeared into the mist. The silence left behind was heavy, pressing against the windows. I scrolled through my phone to distract myself, but there was no signal. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The longer I waited, the louder my heartbeat sounded. I started thinking of calling my mom, but the screen just spun. No bars. That's when I saw movement. Jake came back, but he wasn't alone. Another man walked beside him. He looked like a farmer. Late 40s, clean-shaven, overalls, flannel shirt. But his smile was too wide, stretched in a way that made my stomach twist. "Hey there, kid," he said, voice low and rough. "Jake here says you're looking for a pumpkin. Come on inside. I've got the best ones in the barn." I looked toward the barn behind the field. It was old, wooden, with doors that creaked back and forth in the wind. Jake gave me a small nod. "Yeah, Mark, let's go. He says the big ones are stored in there." The farmer smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. He started talking as we walked, asking weird questions. "You live around here? What's your family's name? You got brothers or sisters? What's your dad do for a living?" I tried to answer casually, but my words came out thin. Why did he need to know that? And why were we going inside when the pumpkins were right here in the open field? My eyes darted toward Jake for reassurance, but he just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching me like he was waiting to see what I'd do. I froze. Then, somewhere behind the barn, a door slammed. It echoed through the fog like a gunshot. I jumped. The farmer stopped smiling. "Come on, it's just inside," he said again, his voice sharper now. My gut screamed no. I shook my head. "Actually, my mom just texted me. She's waiting. We should go." I held up my phone even though it was dead, pretending to read a message. Jake looked at the farmer, and for a second their eyes met. Something silent passed between them. A chill ran through me. Then, after what felt like forever, the farmer sighed and shrugged. "Sure, kid. Take your pick." I grabbed a pumpkin from the edge of the field, first one I could reach. Jake helped me load it into the truck and we drove off. The silence in the car was thick. Jake wasn't talking anymore. No jokes, no laughs, nothing. When I dropped him off at Mr. Taylor's, he just muttered, "See you around," and walked away without looking back. At home, Mom and I carved the pumpkin like nothing happened. But that fog, that barn, that smile, it stayed in my head all night. Later that evening, I had a few friends over. Just a small Halloween hangout, pizza, soda, a couple of old horror movies. There were 8 of us total. I even invited Jake, since he seemed like a decent guy earlier and I didn't want to judge him too hard. He showed up around 8, blending in like nothing weird had ever happened. We laughed, told ghost stories, and for a moment I forgot all about the farm. But then Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, mumbled something like, "Be right back," and slipped outside. I didn't think much of it until 5 minutes later when the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting a late trick-or-treater, maybe a kid in costume, but it wasn't a kid. It was a man. Tall, wearing a black jacket and a mask that looked almost human. One of those hyper-realistic silicone ones. The mouth was frozen in a grin, the eyes blank. Sorry, private party," I said, blocking the doorway. He didn't move. Behind me, my friends started to notice. Ben and Leah came up beside me. "Hey man, this is invite only. You know someone here?" No answer. The man reached into his jacket. For a second, I thought it was a joke. But then he pulled out a gun. A real one. Cold metal gleaming under the porch light. "Everyone," he said, voice low but sharp. "Wallets, phones, jewelry, now." He tossed a duffel bag on the floor. "Put everything in." My stomach dropped. We froze, then scrambled. Phones, watches, cash, whatever we had. The guy's hand never shook. He moved fast, sweeping the gun across the room. I glanced at Jake. He was in the corner. Calm. Too calm. He dropped his wallet into the bag like everyone else, but his face didn't change. He wasn't scared. The man grabbed the bag and ran out the door, disappearing into the door. We locked everything up and called 911. Within minutes, flashing lights lit up the street. The cops took statements, checked our outdoor camera, the one my dad had installed last year. When they played back the footage, my blood went cold. It showed Jake outside, before the break-in. He was talking to the masked man, without the mask on. They stood close, whispering. Then Jake went back inside. The man waited, watching through the window. It was all planned. The cops arrested Jake that night. He didn't fight. At the station, he told them everything. The man at the farm was his uncle, Carl, a career criminal. They'd been running scams for months, targeting people through small-town parties, pretending to be friendly to learn where people lived, what they owned. The pumpkin patch wasn't real. It was a front. They used it to meet new victims and gather information. The questions the farmer asked about my family, those weren't random. He wanted details, maybe even a chance to steal my keys or phone. The party was supposed to be the final hit. Jake had given them my address, told them how many people would be there. When the cops raided the farm the next day, it was empty of pumpkins. Instead, they found piles of stolen stuff. Phones, jewelry, even a few guns. They arrested Carl too. The gun he used that night was loaded and unregistered. We got our things back eventually, but something in me didn't go back to normal. I kept thinking about how close it was, how if I'd gone inside that barn, maybe I wouldn't have come out. That Halloween started like any other, with candy and costumes and fake scares, but it ended with the real kind. The kind that stays with you. Every year now, when October rolls around and fog settles over the road, I can't help but remember that night. Because the truth is, some monsters don't need masks. They just need a friendly smile and a story that sounds good enough to believe. Now, I always double-check the doors, lock the windows, and think twice before trusting anyone new. Mr. Taylor said he never suspected a thing about Jake. He felt terrible, like he'd brought danger right into our street. But the truth is, none of us saw it coming. That Halloween changed me. It made me realize the scariest things out there aren't ghosts or monsters. They're people who smile, talk like friends, and make you feel safe until they don't. Sometimes evil doesn't hide in the dark. It stands right next to you, laughing, pretending to belong. Even now, when I drive past an empty farm road or see fog rolling in, I still get that same chill down my spine, wondering what would have happened if I had stepped inside that barn. So tell me, have you ever trusted someone who later gave you a reason to regret it? Share your story in the comments. I read them all, and if you want more true Halloween horror stories like this, keep watching. The next one might make you sleep with the lights on. When I was about 11, every holiday meant one thing: packing up the car and driving 2 hours out of the city to visit my grandparents in rural Ohio. It was a small, quiet town where everyone knew each other's names, where the biggest excitement was the annual church fair, and where if something strange happened, people just didn't talk about it. My grandparents lived at the very end of a narrow, dead-end street. Their place wasn't fancy, just an old wooden house with a wide porch, the kind that creaked when you walked on it. 2 houses down lived my aunt and uncle, and between them was the one house we all hated walking past, the house where she lived. We never knew her real name. Everyone just called her the Chain Woman. Even saying it gave us chills. She was tall, easily over 6 feet, and broad, like someone who could lift heavy things without breaking a sweat. Around her neck hung thick, rusty logging chains, the kind used to pull tree trunks. They clanked with every step she took. She always wore the same dirty, old-fashioned dresses that looked straight out of the 1950s, and her boots were covered in dried mud. Her gray hair was wild and tangled like she'd been caught in a storm that never ended. I'd see her outside sometimes, usually doing the strangest thing, scrubbing the walls of her house. Not the windows or porch, but the actual walls. She'd stand there with a bucket of soapy water and a hard-bristled brush, scrubbing like she was trying to wash something off that no one else could see. Rain or shine, she did it. The sound of those chains rattling as she worked still sticks in my head, and if we ever got too close, she'd stop, turn toward us, and yell in this deep, raspy voice that sounded like she'd been smoking for 50 years, "You little brats! The devil's coming for you! He's gonna drag you down!" I swear, every time she said it, her voice shook something inside me. We'd freeze for a second, then sprint away laughing, but not because it was funny, because we were scared. The adults always said she was just lonely, that she'd had a hard life, and people in small towns could be eccentric. My mom would say, "Don't bother her, and she won't bother you." But even as a kid, I could tell there was something different about her. Something that didn't feel like loneliness. Every time we had to go from my grandparents' house to my aunt's, we'd have to pass her place. There was no other way. The sidewalk there was cracked and narrow, and her house sat right up against the street. The curtains were always half open, and behind them you could see her shadow moving. Or worse, just standing still, watching. We never walked past alone. We always went in pairs, holding our breath as we hurried by. One time, my older cousin whispered that he heard her muttering something as we passed. Something like, "Burying the sinners!" We laughed about it later to calm our nerves, but deep down, I think every one of us believed she meant it. That Halloween, I was 11. My whole family was at my grandparents' house in that small Ohio town, where every street looked quiet but always felt like something was watching. After dinner, me and my cousins Jake, who was 13, and Sarah, 9, decided to go trick-or-treating. I wore a simple ghost costume, just a white sheet with holes cut out. The night was cold, the streets dark, only a few porch lights flickering here and there. Everything was fine until Jake grinned and said, "Bet you won't go to the chain lady's house." We froze. Anyone knew about her, the strange woman who lived alone between my grandparents' place and my aunt's. Her porch light was never on, her windows always half covered, and her chains clanked whenever she stepped outside, but Jake wouldn't stop. "Come on, don't be chickens. What's she gonna do?" My heart was pounding, but I didn't want to look scared, so I followed. We crept up her walkway, the air thick and heavy, smelling like wet soil and rot. Her garden beds were raised high, packed with fresh dirt that looked newly dug. Sarah hesitated, but finally rang the doorbell. At first, nothing. Then, bang! A loud crash from inside. Then another, like doors slamming. We jumped back, but before we could run, the front door creaked open. She stood there, towering over us. Chains around her neck, her dress stained with dark blotches, hair wild and gray, and in her hands she held a severed head. It dangled by the hair, dripping something thick and dark. The skin was pale, almost blue, and the eyes stared right through us. For a second, no one moved. Then we screamed and ran as fast as we could. I tripped on the cracked sidewalk, scraping my knee, but I didn't stop. When we burst into my grandparents' house crying and out of breath, the adults didn't believe us. My dad laughed and said it was probably a Halloween prop. "Serves you right for bothering her," he said. We tried to calm down, but that head didn't look fake. I couldn't stop seeing it. A few weeks later, just after Thanksgiving, we got a call late at night. I heard my mom crying. The next morning, my parents sat me down. "Something happened at your aunt's house," Dad said. "The lady next door attacked her." My aunt had been carrying groceries inside, holding my little cousin in one arm. It was getting dark. She didn't hear anyone behind her until she felt something wrap around her neck. A rope saw, the kind with handles on both ends. The woman yanked it tight and started sawing back and forth. My aunt dropped everything, screaming and kicking at her front door. My uncle heard and ran out with the fireplace poker. He hit the woman over and over until she collapsed. Blood everywhere. The police and ambulance came fast. My aunt survived, but she needed surgery, more than 30 stitches. She still covers the scar with scarves. But that wasn't the end. When the police searched the woman's property, what they found didn't seem real. Under her house, she'd been digging tunnels. Deep, narrow ones, reinforced with wooden beams, running under several nearby homes. That's what she'd been doing all those years in her garden, hauling dirt up and dumping it into her raised beds to hide it. The tunnels led to a small underground room, a shrine. The walls were covered with strange symbols, melted candles, and crosses turned upside down. And inside, the police found jars and bags holding human remains. 3 heads, preserved like trophies. They belonged to missing people from nearby towns. The woman had been living there for decades, alone, slowly losing her mind. The head we saw that Halloween wasn't a decoration, it was real. It belonged to a man who'd been reported missing just a week before. The cops said if we'd stayed a little longer on her porch that night, we might have ended up just like them. After that, the house was torn down and the tunnels were filled in like they never existed. My aunt and uncle moved far away. They couldn't stand sleeping in a place that still felt haunted, even after the danger was gone. My grandparents stayed for a while, but built tall fences around their yard, the kind that makes you feel safe even when you know it's just an illusion. I don't visit that town much anymore, but every so often, when I drive through quiet neighborhoods at night and see a dark window staring back, I think of her. The chain woman. Her rattling chains, her hollow eyes, and the secrets buried beneath her home. And it makes me wonder, how many other people out there are hiding something behind their fences, their walls, their smiles? Maybe that's the scariest part. You never really know who lives next door. What about you? Have you ever had a neighbor who made your skin crawl? Someone who just didn't seem right? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you want more true Halloween horror stories that'll make you double check your locks tonight, keep watching because the next one is even darker.
He said his baby was asleep, but I still hear her crying sometimes. The sound comes back to me every Halloween. That faint, muffled whimper in the dark, the kind you tell yourself must be the wind. But deep down, I know it wasn't. It happened when I was 7, Halloween night. The air smelled like wet leaves and cheap plastic masks, and the streetlights buzzed with that orange hum that makes everything feel slower. My mom had dropped me off at my friend Sean's house to trick-or-treat, just me, him, and his older friend Johnny. No parents, no rules, just the 3 of us with pillowcases and flashlights that barely worked. Sean's place always made me uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. The stale scent of cat fur, the quiet TV glow from his sister's room, the way the hallway lights flickered when someone walked past. That night, it all felt heavier, quieter, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. We told ourselves we'd stay out late, fill our bags until they ripped. But even before we reached the end of the block, I remember glancing over my shoulder, wondering why every shadow looked like it was watching us. We'd been out for hours when the streets finally emptied. Porch lights clicked off one by one, and the laughter of other kids disappeared into the wind until it was just us. 2 boys dragging pillowcases full of candy through quiet, damp air. My flashlight flickered, and every time it did, I caught Sean glancing over his shoulder. We both knew it. We'd wandered farther than we should have. The next block felt different. The houses were older, the lawns darker, and there wasn't a single voice around. That's when I noticed him, a man pushing a stroller, a few houses behind. He walked slowly, rhythmically, like he wasn't in a hurry to get anywhere. At first, I thought he was just another dad finishing up trick-or-treating. But the longer he stayed behind us, the more deliberate his steps seemed. We stopped at a house, and when I looked back, he was closer. The streetlight above him flickered, washing him in pale orange. He was humming something soft, a lullaby, slow and offbeat. When he finally called out to us, his voice was calm, polite even. "How's the trick-or-treating going, boys?" Sean answered. The man smiled and said his daughter was asleep in the stroller, that he didn't want to wake her. Then he offered us the rest of his candy, said he hadn't given much out. It sounded normal, but something about his tone, quiet and too even, felt wrong. He pointed up the street. "My house is just up this way." Sean hesitated, then shrugged. We followed behind, a few steps back. The stroller wheels clicked on the pavement, keeping time with his footsteps. The further we walked, the quieter everything got. No wind, no cars, no voices, just that rhythm. He asked us where we lived, if our parents were waiting. Every few steps, he leaned into the stroller and whispered something, then looked back to make sure we were still following. When we reached his house, I noticed right away, no lights, no pumpkins, no sound. He walked straight up to the door and unlocked it without turning on the porch light. "Come in," he said. "I'll grab the candy bags." Sean went first. I followed, uneasy. The air inside was thick and stale, like the place had been closed up for months. It smelled like wet wood, and something faintly sour. The only light came from a small lamp in the corner, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. He pushed the stroller into the middle of the room and said, "Wait, right there." Then he disappeared down the hall. I heard drawers open, something metallic clink. I turned to Sean, whispered that we should wait outside. He didn't answer, just stared at the stroller. It sat perfectly still, the fabric cover pulled down low. There was no sound, not even breathing. Sean stepped forward, slow, careful. I wanted to tell him not to, but my voice caught in my throat. He reached out and lifted the flap. For a second, he didn't move. Then he turned to me, his face pale, eyes wide, and whispered, "We need to go." He grabbed my arm and we ran. The front door creaked behind us as we bolted out, our bags slamming against our legs. I didn't look back, didn't want to see if he was following. We didn't stop running until we reached the next corner. Sean wouldn't talk. He just kept muttering, "It was empty, it was empty," over and over. That's when a woman shouted from across the street, "Hey, you boys, wait!" She ran toward us, breathless, eyes full of panic. "Do you know that man?" she asked. I said no, that he'd offered us candy. Sean's voice cracked as he said, "The stroller, it was empty." The woman froze. Her face changed. Not shock, but recognition. She grabbed our hands and told us to come with her. We got into her car, and she locked the doors right away. As she started driving, she kept checking the mirror. I turned around once and saw it. A faint figure at the end of the street, standing perfectly still beside the curb, the stroller next to him. We didn't say a word the whole drive. The woman dropped us off at home and talked to my mom, her voice shaking. I remember sitting on my bed later that night, the candy still untouched in the pillowcase, my ears ringing with that same soft sound, the wheels of a stroller rolling slowly down a quiet street. Every Halloween since, I swear I still hear it, just faintly, that squeak of wheels on pavement, moving closer even when no one's there. When the woman dropped me off, my mom was already waiting. I told her everything, the man, the stroller, how we ran. She didn't say a word, just called the police and told me to go to my room. I sat there in the dark, hearing her voice through the wall, then silence. No sirens, no answers. The next day, she said only one thing: never talk about it again. I never saw police on that street, and Sean and I stopped being friends after that. Years later, I passed that neighborhood once. Most houses look different, except one. Curtains still drawn, porch light dead. As I walked by, I heard it again, the faint squeak of stroller wheels behind me. I didn't turn around, and I never walk that way anymore. He rang the doorbell 3 times before I realized he wasn't a kid. The porch light caught the edge of his mask, cheap plastic smeared red around the mouth, and for a second I thought he was smiling, but he didn't move. He just stood there, one hand clutching an empty brown sack, the other resting on the doorknob like he was waiting for me to open it. It was Halloween night, 2016, the kind of quiet suburban Monday where you can hear every leaf scrape across the driveway. My parents were out, and I'd been handing out candy since sunset, mostly toddlers and tired parents. By 9, the neighborhood was dead. The air had that cold, wet smell it gets before rain, and even my dog had stopped barking. When the bell rang again, I almost didn't answer until I saw his shadow move across the window, taller than anyone I'd seen all night, still as a statue, watching. I stood behind the door longer than I should have, just listening. The house was too still. Not quiet, but waiting. Through the frosted glass, I could see his shadow, tall, stiff, unmoving. My dog, Vito, pressed against my leg, growling so low it vibrated through me. I whispered, "We're out of candy," hoping he'd hear and leave. He didn't move, he just stood there. I turned off the porch light, thinking that would send him away. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Then came the faint squeal of the storm door handle, metal scraping metal, followed by a hollow thud. That was when it hit me. I hadn't locked it. My heart started pounding in my throat. Vito barked wildly, and I covered his muzzle, praying whoever was out there would just walk away. Finally, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, dragging through the wet leaves. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, then locked the main door and every window in the house. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped the keys. Upstairs, I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, probably a bored teenager trying to scare people. I put on a show to drown the noise in my head, the flicker of the laptop lighting the room. But even over the sound, I could feel it, that heavy silence pressing down on the house. Then came the doorbell. It wasn't a normal ring. It was one long, deliberate press, like whoever was out there wanted me to know they weren't done. Vito jumped off the bed, barking again. I sat frozen, staring at the hallway. The bell rang again. Twice, faster this time. I grabbed my phone and texted my family. "Someone's at the door again. Dressed as a clown. Won't leave." No one replied. Then came a faint metallic clack. The storm door latch. The sound crawled under my skin. I muted my phone, afraid even the vibration would tell him I was still awake. I could hear him shifting outside, slow, patient, not walking away. And then a sharp snap. Metal bending. The storm door latch breaking. I held my breath as the main doorknob started to turn. Once, twice, harder each time. The entire door frame rattled. I started to dial 911, but before I pressed the call button, silence. Everything stopped. I waited. 10 minutes, maybe more. When nothing else happened, I told myself he was gone. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket over me, like it could actually protect me. My body refused to relax, but my exhaustion didn't care. I must have drifted off. I woke up to Vito's growl. Not loud, just a low, constant rumble. His body was tense, his eyes fixed on the window. Then I heard it too. A soft tap, then another. Slow, steady. It took me a few seconds to understand it was coming from outside. My bedroom window. The one on the second floor. Every instinct told me not to look, but I moved anyway. I pulled the blinds open and froze. That same clown mask stared back at me through the glass. The red paint around the mouth was smeared whiter than before. His eyes, or at least the black mesh where his eyes should have been, were locked straight on mine. One gloved hand rested against the glass. The other gripped the top of my dad's ladder, leaning against the side of the house. He tilted his head, slow, curious. Then he tapped again. Tap, tap. The sound muffled through the window, but sharp enough to cut through my chest. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My body just shut down. Then Vito lunged, barking furiously. The noise snapped me out of it. I stumbled backward, grabbed my phone, and ran into my parents' bedroom, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. When the 911 operator answered, my voice came out as a whisper. He's outside my window. He climbed up. The operator told me to stay where I was, that help was on the way. I sat there, clutching the phone, listening to every creak in the house. At one point, I could swear I heard footsteps. Faint, deliberate, moving across the roof. When red and blue lights finally flashed through the curtains, everything went still. The police searched around the house. They found the storm door latch bent and broken, and my dad's ladder leaning against the siding under my window. But no footprints. No fingerprints. Just faint smudges where his gloved hands had pressed the glass. They told me it was probably a prank. I wanted to believe them, but I saw the look one officer gave the window before he left. That quiet pause that said otherwise. I packed a bag and drove to my friend Adam's house before sunrise. When I reached his porch, I hesitated before ringing the bell. My finger hovered there, frozen. Because even now, every time I hear a doorbell, I feel that same cold air behind me, the kind that means someone's standing too close. Waiting. The police said it was just a prank, but the house didn't feel the same after that. The air stayed cold, heavy, like he'd left a part of himself inside. I sat awake till morning, staring at the window, afraid to blink in case that mask reappeared. My parents changed the locks, but no lock fixes what that kind of fear does. Years later, I still freeze when a doorbell rings. It's not the sound that scares me now, it's the silence right after. Because sometimes, in that quiet, I swear I can still hear faint footsteps on the roof. Slow, deliberate, waiting. When we got to the house, the lights were on, but no one answered the door. Music played inside, faint, muffled, like it was coming from a floor below us, and every few seconds we swore we heard voices. But when we finally pushed the door open, the sound stopped. All of it. It was late October, the Saturday before Halloween. The air was cold enough that our breath hung white under the streetlight, and the wind smelled like wet leaves and cheap beer. We'd been searching for a last-minute party all night, when one of my friends found this one through a guy she barely knew. The address looked normal enough. A big house at the end of a quiet street, cars parked out front, porch light glowing orange. From the outside, it looked alive. But stepping inside, it didn't feel like a party. It didn't even feel like anyone lived there. At first, it felt like any other college house party. Dark lights, cheap decorations, that thick, sweet smell of alcohol mixed with sweat. But the longer we stayed, the more it felt wrong. The air inside was colder than outside, and the music, that faint bass we heard through the door, wasn't coming from any speaker we could find. It sounded distant, like it was coming from underground. A man came up to us soon after we walked in. Older, maybe late 40s, early 50s, dressed neatly, not like anyone else there. He smiled too easily. Said his name was John, and that he was Luke's dad. I remember that because none of us knew a Luke. He told us Luke was the one hosting, but we never saw anyone by that name the whole night. Still, he was charming in that forced, too polite way that made you want to be polite back. He offered to take our drinks to the kitchen, said we could keep them cold in the cooler. The kitchen was dim, lit by orange string lights that buzzed faintly. There were 3 big coolers, all filled with ice and cans of beer. But when I leaned in, the ice wasn't melting. It looked like glass. Cold but dry. My friends didn't notice. They just laughed, dropped their drinks in, and thanked him. John followed us back to the living room. He was trying too hard to make conversation, asking about our costumes, our majors, where we were from. His smile never really left his face, but his eyes didn't match it. They flicked between us, mostly toward my friend Kate. When he laughed, it sounded hollow, like someone mimicking what laughter should sound like. We started playing beer pong with a few guys near the back, and for a while it felt normal again. But something about the house just didn't fit. The walls were bare. No pictures, no furniture, not even curtains. Just empty rooms filled with people who didn't seem to know each other. I asked one guy how he heard about the party, and he said he thought it was some frat thing. Another said he'd seen it on Instagram. None of them knew whose house it was. Then John called out our names from the kitchen. I didn't remember telling him mine, but he said it perfectly. First and last. Shots! He yelled. The girls cheered, so I followed. There were 4 glasses lined up on the counter. The tequila smelled sharp and chemical, like nail polish remover. He raised his glass and said, "To new friends." It burned going down, more than it should have. I gagged and laughed it off, but something about the aftertaste made my stomach twist. I brushed it off. Maybe just bad tequila. But within minutes, the room felt different. The lights looked dimmer. The noise seemed further away. My head was heavy, like I was sinking into something. John asked what our favorite drinks were and started mixing cocktails while we went back to play another round. Every few minutes he came back with new drinks. Mine was clear, fizzy. I took a sip out of habit even though I was already drunk. The next few minutes after that are a blur. I remember leaning on the table, trying to focus on the ball. Then, nothing. Just flashes. Kate laughing. The sound of ice clinking. John's voice behind me, whispering something I couldn't make out. Then, darkness. When I came to, I was in a car, my friend's car, parked outside my house. The windows were fogged. My head was spinning so hard I thought I'd throw up. My clothes smelled faintly of bleach and perfume. Someone helped me out and walked me to the door. I don't even remember saying goodbye. Inside, the house was quiet. My parents were asleep. I checked my phone. A bunch of missed texts, one from an unknown number. I opened it. The first message was from me. "Hey, it's my name." Then a reply. "John, smiley face, nice to meet you." The timestamp said it was from earlier that night, sometime between the beer pong game and the blackout. There were more messages. "You looked so cute." "Where did my favorite girls go?" Then, hours later, "Where are you? You left something here. I'm outside." The last message was sent at 2:07 a.m. I felt sick. I sent screenshots to the group chat, and one by one my friends started replying, piecing together what they remembered. Kate said I started acting weird after that last drink, staring at nothing, barely speaking. They said John kept hovering around, trying to get us to go see the basement. They said when they tried to leave, he got angry. That's when 2 police cars pulled up outside. Someone had called in a noise complaint. Everyone scattered. My friend Shauna mentioned something I hadn't noticed before. How empty the house had been. No furniture, no photos, not even light switches that worked. Just extension cords running along the floor into one locked door in the hallway. We decided to take everything, the texts, the number, what happened, to the police the next morning. The officer at the front desk asked if we were talking about the vacant house party. We all looked at each other, confused. He explained there had been reports of people breaking into an abandoned property and using it for a Halloween event. The house we'd been in had been vacant for months. We told him that was impossible. There was power, music, people. But when we drove back later that day, the street was quiet. No cars, no lights. The windows were boarded up. It looked nothing like the place we'd been in hours before. The police traced the number John used. It wasn't real. A VoIP line. Untraceable. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after that. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart stopped. Even now, years later, I still don't know what happened in that house, or who that man really was. But sometimes, when I think about that night, I remember something small. The way the ice in those coolers never melted, even after hours under the lights. And sometimes, when I walk home late and pass a house with its porch light glowing orange, I swear I can still hear that same muffled bass. Faint, deep, echoing from somewhere below the floor. Skingy. The police said they'd look into it. But weeks passed and none of us heard back. Every time I called, they said the same thing. No leads, no suspects, no trace of anyone named John. I tried to move on, but it's hard to sleep when you don't know what you survived. The thought that he could still be out there, that he might be watching someone else's story play out right now, never really leaves me. A month later, I got a text from another unknown number. Just one line, "Missed you at the party this year." I deleted it, but sometimes I still dream of that house. The lights on, the music faint, the door unlocked, waiting.